quick rundown of coming attractions. November 29th, 2022, Marge Faber will give a program on the history of Monroe County post offices. January 3rd, we're going to move that a little bit because it would have been December 27th, just 2 days after Christmas, and I thought that might be kind of troublesome, so we moved it to the next week, January 3rd, 2023. Roger Robinson will give a program called The Eighth Wonder of the World, the Indianapolis Traction Terminal. January 31st, Al Parker, a wildlife biologist, will give a program on the history of the bald eagle reintroduction to Lake Monroe. February 28th, which will be our 10th anniversary, James Krause will give a program on the Indiana Theater at 100 years old and probably talk about a couple of the other old downtown theaters too. March 28th, Hilary Fleck will return from the History Center to present highlights from the Herald Times photo collection. April 25th, John Baton, professor at IU, gives a program where he describes what would it look like to walk through the streets of Bloomington more than 100 years ago. Sounds fascinating to me. The Rediscovering Bloomington project seeks to answer these questions and more. May 30th, 2023, Susan Snyder Salomon will give a program on the history of dry stack stone walls in Monroe County. June 27th, James Capshew will give a program on the life and times of Herman B. Wells. July 25th, Cats TV, the people that record all these, are going to give a program on themselves. They've been here over 45 years, and they're going to explain what they do, you know, for our area, which is a lot. They've helped us a lot, that's for sure. August 29th, Christine Friesel we have a program on the Duncan family and the Mechanics Band of the late 1800s. That brings us to today, and what a great subject Hilary thought up, called Order Up, the history of old restaurants from Bloomington, Indiana that we may remember from our childhood. Hilary?
Thank you very much. Before we get started really quick, I'm going to put this on here. And then I also brought along with me... You got to be closer to the microphone. I also brought... You turned it off. Now is it on? Okay. I also brought along with me the menus that are... Okay, thank you. I brought along menus that we have included in the exhibit. So Andrea is passing them around, but I do need them back at the end of the day. So please don't walk off with them. But if you would like to see them again, please let me know because I can get you copies of them. Hi, I'm Hilary Fleck, the curator at the History Center. And thank you all for coming today, and thank you to the History Club for letting me to present again. As always, thank you to the Legion for hosting and for CATS for filming. I'm really excited to talk to you today about restaurants of Monroe County. This is presented in conjunction with the Order Up exhibit that is currently on view at the History Center. You have to hurry to see it because it does close, like the slide says, it does close next Saturday on November 5th. Here we go. To think of how an exhibit starts, it generally starts with an idea. What was the idea for the exhibit? This idea for this restaurant exhibit came from Sue Sheldon, who was a longtime volunteer, board member, and friend of the History Center. She always knew what a great collection of menus that we have at the History Center, as you can see from the handouts that we're passing out. And so she always knew what a great exhibit it would be. Unfortunately, Sue didn't live to see the restaurant's exhibit come to fruition. Sue passed away in 2019, and she is greatly missed at the History Center, but I hope that you all get to enjoy her wonderful idea of restaurants in Monroe County. These are just some of the menus from our collection. Encore Café, Boxman's, Ladyman, Stardust, and Mother Bears. Oh, thank you. Okay. In addition to menus and photographs of restaurants in our collection, I decided to also take a brief very brief look at the early restaurants and how they developed over time. According to the authors of Dining Out, A Global History of Restaurants, the earliest form of a restaurant would be food stands from 1100 AD China. This is a tapestry that's showing here. This is kind of what a food stand with some tables, so kind of like what we think of restaurants today. Seasonal workers and traders would be visiting large cities, and the stalls kind of developed to feed these out-of-town visitors and their out-of-town tastes. So China also developed kind of more closely what we think of restaurants today as a purpose-built in establishment with a menu and dishes that were served to customers. The authors note that while the trade between the East and the West happened over centuries, there doesn't really seem to be influence as early back as 1100 AD in the West, as there was these restaurants developing in the East at the same time. The earliest gatherings that resembled restaurants in the West happened much later, in about 1600s in France. At these gatherings, which seem to be less formal than today's dinner parties, but more formal than kind of a restaurant situation, but Frenchmen would gather at what is called a communal midday meal, which would have a set price and a set menu. So guests didn't get a choice. If you weren't at the table on time, you didn't get a meal. And the cook decided what was served that day, and changes were not allowed. So you kind of just showed up, ate, paid your meal, and then left. The word restaurant does come from a French verb, which means to restore oneself. And Indiana University researcher Rebecca Spang uncovered that the first true restaurants in France sprang from bouillon shops in the late 1700s in France, which catered mainly to the rising French merchant class at the time, kind of like around the French Revolution, rising middle class kind of thing. However, restaurants in America, as we know them today, are 19th century inventions. The rise of the heavy populated urban centers such as New York City and the rising middle class in America led to more disposable income and more options to spend that income. The oldest restaurant in America is a title claimed by Delmonico's in Manhattan, which has been operating continuously with the exception of the 2020 pandemic. Oldest operating restaurant in America since 1837. Now back to Monroe County. So early on, restaurants were bars and dining rooms and in hotels that catered to travelers. In Bloomington, the National Hotel, originally Worley's Tavern, was one of the earliest local hotels that included a dining room. It wasn't until 1901 that we have records, which is a key word, that we have records of a restaurant that is not associated with a hotel, Howe's Café. See, here's an advertisement for Howe's Café. Located at 121 North College Avenue. Jesse A. Howe owned Howe's Candy Kitchen, which could have also later served as Howe's Café. It kind of Howe's Café was not in the phone directory, but Howe's Candy Kitchen was, so I think they're the same establishment. Jesse's father, Joshua Howe, was a Civil War veteran and also listed as a merchant in the census records, so it's possible that the candy store was passed down from father to son. And so it's possible that before 1901, there was Howe's Candy Kitchen was still there. We just don't have record of it. Another early restaurant was Coyle's Restaurant, which is this advertisement in this newspaper article. Located at 116 North Washington Street. It was owned by Anthony and Daisy Coyle and opened in 1909. Owning and operating an independent restaurant at this time was quite a feat because the general population of Monroe County was around 20,000 people. In relation, the IU freshman class is around 16,000. So the whole town was almost one freshman class at IU. Anthony was an Irish immigrant and a baker, and Daisy helped to run the restaurant portion of the East Side Bakery and Restaurant, east side of the square. From this newspaper clipping up here, it seems that the Coyles later opened the Busy Bee restaurant in 1950. And by that time, there were several other restaurants also open in Bloomington. The Blue Lantern Café at 108 East Kirkwood, May's Restaurant at 114 North Morton, Wells Cafe at 115 East Kirkwood, and the Book Nook at 114 South Indiana. The Hotel Graham was another early dining location in Bloomington, previously known as the Bose Hotel and Hotel Gentry. The Hotel Graham was owned by William Graham and managed by Preston Gilliott since the late 19-teens. Mr. Gilliott purchased the hotel from Graham in 1928 and then raised a third of the building to make room for additional rooms, which we still have, which still exist today, including this newly renovated dining room. So this is a photograph. We don't have photographs of the early dining before renovation of Graham Hotel, but this is the 1928 renovation dining room at the hotel. The dining room at the hotel also hosted not only hotel guests, but meetings and dinners of local organizations and social groups. This is another clipping of a restaurant that I found, this one stating a big roast dinner anytime at Farmer's Home Restaurant opposite the Harris Grand Theater, 20 cents. Trying to locate a photograph of the restaurant was more difficult, but the Harris Grand was on the corner of 7th and Walnut. Now getting into later restaurants. Ladyman's. Ladyman's, now I'm going into more profiles of specific restaurants. Ladyman's Café was a downtown Bloomington staple for decades. Opened by Tom Ladyman in 1957, he purchased the cafe from the Bender family, who operated Bender's Café at the same location. Longtime cook Jack Covert kept the customers coming back, making breakfast the busiest time for the cafe. We often heard stories that they would, many downtown people working downtown, of county, city officials, lawyers, a lot of lawyers, because they're going to the courthouse, would meet here at Ladyman's and have coffee before getting the day started. Tom eventually passed ownership to his son Ted, who worked and cooked in the restaurant for years. Ted continued to work at Ladyman's Cafe after he sold the business to longstanding waitress Dana Reynolds and investor Stuart Coe. The diner, unfortunately, suffered an arson fire in early 2006 and didn't recover, closing for good on December 10th, 2006. Boxman's. Boxman's was originally the Dewdrop Inn, but Boxman's restaurant was purchased by, well, the Dewdrop Inn was purchased by Mr. and Mrs. Henry Boxman in 1928 at 422 South Walnut Street. Boxman's was the first establishment in town to have curbside service and a neon sign, both of which you can see in this photograph. So here's the neon sign right here. The first neon sign in town. In 1935, the restaurant expanded into the two-story brick building to the south. And for 30 years, Mr. Boxman owned the restaurant. He was very active in the Bloomington business community. Mr. Boxman sold the restaurant to become the director of food service for the local school district. He was responsible for centralizing cafeteria management and oversaw the construction of the kitchens at 6 new schools during that time. We do have quite a large collection from Boxman's. Henry and Hattie did donate quite a large collection to the History Center. So these are just some photographs that we have that are in the collection. This is, it's listed as a junior prom. So you can see everybody's dressed very nicely, but it seems to be around St. Patrick's Day because all of the lights have these little 3-leaf clovers over them. Then this is just a social organization that's using what was called the back meeting room at Boxman's, so you can kind of get an idea of what the back meeting room looks like. And then this was a fun article that appeared in the newspaper at the time, is training the waitresses at Boxman's. And we do have a employee code of conduct that the Boxman's utilized for all of their wait staff and employees. A few more things. Boxman's was also pretty highlighted in several national magazines. Gourmet magazine, I think, was one of them. But this was a magazine highlight that we have of Boxman's in Bloomington. This one This one, okay, so this is Henry, and then Mrs. Martin. And it says, the caption that we have for the photo is, Mrs. Martin is proud to be the best pastry lady. And then we have a newspaper clipping, and I can read it to you because it's very hard to see. It says, with curtailed help in restaurants, owners have to be, and are, more careful than ever of proper sanitary procedures to protect the health of their customers. The above reproduction is a typical State Board of Health restaurant inspection. It shows Henry F. Boxman, local restaurant operator, cooperating with state sanitarian Hollis Jackson in Boxman's restaurant kitchen, testing the temperature of the water in which Boxman's dishes are sterilized after washing. It passed the test. So it was both in addition to saying that, you know, they had a state inspection, they passed the inspection, so it's really great and sanitary to eat there. So Henry Boxman did sell the restaurant Boxman's, but then he went into working for the school district, but he later regained his title as restaurant owner with Boxman's Kentucky Fried Chicken at 434 South Walnut, so just a few doors down from his old restaurant. Boxman actually met Colonel Sanders through his time consulting for the War Department. So during World War II, Henry Boxman, with his knowledge in restaurants and the restaurant ordering business, he was a member of the special consulting group of restaurant owners to the War Department to help increase the quality and the efficiency with which food was delivered to soldiers during the war. So he's part of a committee of about 20 men throughout the country who owned restaurants, owned food corporations, that sort of thing, to consult the War Department during this time. And Colonel Sanders was also one of the men on this committee. So that's how they had met each other and developed a friendship. It was written in one of the newspaper articles that we have that this was the first franchise of Kentucky Fried Chicken, but I found through research that it's not true. And the first franchise for Kentucky Fried Chicken was actually in South Salt Lake, Utah in 1952. So just about 10 years before, that was the first serious franchise. But this might be the first dedicated chicken restaurant, Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant, but it's definitely not the first franchise of the restaurant. So I did mention that Henry Boxman purchased the Dewdrop Inn to make it Boxman's restaurant. And so we don't have any pictures of the Dewdrop Inn, but we do have a menu from the Dewdrop Inn, which is these two pictures here. It's very small, very fragile. The paper inside is not in really great condition, but we also have two pictures from 1928 in Boxman's, which is the year that he purchased the building. So I thought potentially this is what the inside of the Dewdrop Inn looked like. I don't know if he immediately renovated or made some changes as soon as he purchased the building, but I thought this is close to what the Dewdrop Inn interior looked like. There's sort of a soda fountain here and a bar with maybe more soda fountain, couple of little chairs, not too many, not too big of a place, but and then he did expand into the Mitchell building next to it to the south. So I couldn't find much more information on the Dewdrop Inn. There's not a whole lot of records on it. It's at 422 South Walnut Street before Henry Boxman purchased it in 1928. But these are the earliest pictures that we have of Boxman's. So, and so on the menu from the Dewdrop Inn in the collection, the most expensive item on the menu is a T-bone steak with potatoes, bread, butter, and a drink for 65 cents. And other items include sandwiches, hamburgers, bacon, soups, chili, and several breakfast items. So, and then there on the cover of the menu, they have Thompson's malted milk. So that was another dairy, local dairy. Next, we have the Village Inn. So if you wanted fried chicken in Ellisville, you made your way to the Village Inn. Isn't that right? Yes. The Thursday night all-you-can-eat fried chicken nights often had people lining up out the door, out the door for their share. The building was constructed by Wayne Cooper, and it was an ultra-modern business building. The first lease opened in 1959 as Sharpie's Restaurant, with a Lowell Sharp as the owner of the restaurant. A couple of years later, it seems that Sharpie's was only there for until 61, so really only a couple of years. The lease reverted back to the building owner, Wayne Cooper, who renamed the restaurant the Village Inn. Underneath the main dining area, the restaurant featured a private dining room that was clad in limestone because Wayne was a former stonemason. The Village Inn on Temperance Street is a classic small-town eatery, and it has a famous liar's bench that sat in the middle of the main dining area and was a communal table where friends and neighbors could gossip over their coffee and breakfast. This is a newspaper article that features the liar's bench and everyone gathering together in one of those mornings. You can sit at the liar's bench today in our gallery, as I have the table on loan from Wayne Cooper's granddaughter, Tekka Miller. I have done my best to recreate the roof. You can't really see it in this picture, but it's kind of like this little roof that's going on over here. I have done my best to recreate the roof over the table, so you'll have to come and check it out and let me know what you think. Currently, the owners of the historic Village Inn building have it up for sale, but you can still get your coffee and breaded tenderloin at the new Village Inn location just 2 miles southeast in Ellettsville. Okay, May's Café, the Penguin / Chocolate Mousse. So, May's Café was a restaurant owned and operated by Cletus and Elmsley May, opening in 1933 at 405 South Walnut Street. Serving breakfast and sandwiches for nearly 20 years, the couple's son, Doran, downsized from the full restaurant to an ice cream shop and renamed it the Penguin. Renamed it the Penguin and moved to an A-frame building next door. So I understand that the Penguin, like the A-frame building that we know, but the cafe was just to the south, like the building that's right over here, that's not in the photo. So it did close for a period of time, but the business reopened in 1983 as the Chocolate Mousse by the same May family. For decades, the Chocolate Mousse opened as a handmade ice cream in our community, with parents sharing the beloved treat with their children and grandchildren. It came as a shock to many in the community when the Chocolate Mousse was torn down in 2016. I know I was. It was sad. To make way for an apartment complex. However, the Chocolate Mousse still operates at the same location, and it now serves vegan options as well. So this is the historic, this was one iteration of Penguin. Then we have the A-frame house set as a penguin with a lovely little penguin trash can outside. And then it became the Chocolate Mousse with the stripes we know it, and then now the new location. Well, the same location, new building. Bruce's. So Bruce's was owned and operated by Bruce Collier. Who was a former Army cook. It opened in 1950 and is what is currently Juanita's restaurant. Bruce opened the cafe at 3 a.m. every day and would serve the night owls, early risers, and the third shift crowd of Bloomington. Bruce served a number of breakfast foods and sandwiches throughout the day, working effortlessly at the griddle before the cafe closed at 3 p.m. Bruce passed ownership to his son, Kurt, in 1979, and the prices were cheap, which created a regular base of customers, and many stopping in every morning for a 30-cent cup of coffee. Unfortunately, Bruce's Cafe closed its doors in 1989. I've heard a lot about Bruce's, and I could not have a restaurant exhibit without including Bruce's Cafe, so I included it. Thank you. Nick's. One of today's most popular landmarks in Bloomington has very humble beginnings. Greek immigrant Nick Rismalos arrived in Bloomington in 1918. He opened 2 other small food shops before opening Nick's in 1927. Hanging out at Nick's quickly became a student tradition, and the staff like family. One of their longtime waitresses, Ruthie Collier Stewart, worked at Nick's for over 40 years and was actually married in Nick's attic. After Nick Rismalos passed in 1953, his wife and son sold the business in 1957 to Dick Barnes, who helped modernize and expand the restaurant. Dick brought pizza to Bloomington by opening the Café Pizzeria in 1954 and put its first pizza parlor in Bloomington. Once Dick became the owner of Nick's, he would bring pizza from the pizzeria over to Nick's for customers. So if a customer ordered a pepperoni pizza, they would call over to the pizzeria, have them make it, and then haul it over the next door. Dick brought a managing partners Greg Rags Rago and Mike Muggsy Hall in 2005. And since then, they, along with Susan Bright, became the owners of Nick's. Their leadership has honored the near 100-year legacy of Nick's English Hut while still bringing the establishment into the 21st century. So it still retains the original exterior and front door, but they have expanded. The Book Nook and the Gables. So the Book Nook was originally a very small, I don't know if you can really tell in this photo, but it's a very tiny place that was a student supply store on Indiana Avenue, which was purchased by Greg Pulitzen in 1906. He turned it into a soda fountain, which you can see here in the picture. They're at the soda counter here, and then there's candies in this display case right here. So he turned it into a soda fountain, but he kept the name. By 1914, the building was apparently in very rough shape, and so it had to be torn down, but it was rebuilt as you see the Gables today. In this restaurant, the legendary local musician, Hoagie Carmichael, as we all know, wrote Stardust, one of his most famous songs. For a brief period after owner George's death, the Book Nook belonged to another Greek family, the Costas. The four Pulitzen sons, however, bought the business back in 1932 and opened as the Gables. The site is synonymous with IU's student history and continues to be a popular hangout today as Buffalo's at the Gables. There were many factors that, okay, so I had to mention the Greeks because two of our longest running restaurants in Monroe County were owned and operated by Greek immigrants. So I decided to talk about the Greek immigrants in Monroe County. So there were many factors that led Greeks to immigrate to America in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and it was mainly to escape poverty and to find a better life, as many immigrants were under the same motivations. They often knew other Greeks and settled in America and joined them and as they came over in work or in business. This was true of the two Greek families, the Pulitzens and the Harismaloses, who landed in Bloomington in the early 1900s. George Pulitzen arrived in Bloomington in 1906 on the advice of a Greek friend who knew of a family business that needed help. So it's like the Greek bat signal. It's like, we need somebody to help. Who do you know? Oh, I know my cousin George, he wants to come. Let's hire George. So George arrived in Bloomington. Oh, I already read that. Okay. So once in Bloomington, he later on opened the Greek Candy Kitchen, the Book Nook, and then the Gables. Similarly, Nick Rismalos came to Bloomington in 1918 on the news that there were other Greeks in the area who also needed help in their candy restaurants. A lot of Greeks started with candy restaurants and candy kitchens. It's a whole thing in the Midwest is these Greek candy kitchens. And then Nick Rismalos established Nick's English Hut. In the early 1900s, however, were not always a welcoming time for Greeks in America. Nativism was popular after World War I, and anyone who was seen as not American was the target of hate. The Ku Klux Klan in America circulated anti-Greek propaganda, claiming falsely that their candy kitchens were fronts for white slavery. Catherine Pulitzen, who was the daughter of George, recalled that in the 1920s, quote, every Friday night, the Ku Klux Klan would ride horses around and around the main square in a torchlight parade. Many times the windows of her parents' store were broken, end quote. And that happened here in Bloomington. The families overcame adversities such as racism and economic hardship to prosper in Bloomington and still contribute to our community's unique culture and history today. So back to restaurants. Grove's Restaurant was opened by Mrs. Gretchen Groves on February 18, 1950. Mrs. Groves had been in the food business for a long time by that point. She was serving in the RCA cafeteria during World War II and earlier at the Graham Hotel. Mrs. Groves was interviewed by the Herald Telephone newspaper in 1972 about opening her own restaurant. She says, quote, "I was a little nervous at the prospect of opening my own establishment when I first started," she said, "but it worked out very well." Mrs. Groves' persimmon pudding was one of the best dishes served, and she was even asked for the recipe by Gourmet and Bon Appetit magazines, which we do have the letters from the magazines requesting her specific recipe for those for the persimmon pudding and another one for her pie. She turned them down. We do, however, have the recipe for persimmon pudding included in the exhibit. So if you would like to have it and like to make some, you can stop by the exhibit before November 5th and you can pick up her recipe, her famous recipe apparently. Okay, the whole. So the B.G. Pollard Lodge was constructed in 1950 to house the local chapter of the Improved Benevolent Protective Order of the Elks of the World, a fraternal philanthropic organization founded in 1898. Bloomington was racially segregated into the mid-20th century, and the lodge provided a refuge and social connection for area black residents in the near West Side neighborhood. The basement of the lodge was a social club known as The Hole, which served delicious soul food and great music. It was a place where the black community could unwind, share news, and have a good time without the pressure of white society. History Center volunteer Liz Mitchell recounts that the Hole was a great place to meet people, and boy did it have good chicken. Unfortunately, leadership changes in the 1980s caused a rift among lodge members and a new non-local clientele that tended to cause trouble. As downtown expanded and the near West Side neighborhood moved towards gentrification, the illicit activity of the new patrons at the lodge became unwelcome. With membership in decline and mounting pressure from the neighborhood, the lodge was sold to a private couple in 2006. The building is currently on the Indiana Landmark's most endangered list because the building continues to deteriorate. It unfortunately doesn't look like this anymore. This is actually a really nice picture of it. Right now, it's really not great at all. The significance of the black community of Bloomington, the building's significance to the black community of Bloomington and Monroe County cannot be understated, and it's really a shame that the current owners are not doing more to preserve the structure. Pancho's. One of the most beloved Mexican restaurants in Bloomington was actually owned and operated by a man of Croatian and Romanian descent. But if you knew Danny Pavlich, it comes as no surprise. Danny's daughter Liza, thank you, sitting over there, recalled that he started his restaurant career very informally by making tacos for his roommates at IU in the 1960s while he was studying, of all things, zoology. Opening in 1967, Pancho's Villa started with a limited menu, but quickly became a town favorite. Students would flock to the patio, as you can see here, would flock to the patio to enjoy the famous bean dip enchiladas and tamales. Danny was an avid IU basketball fan and a friend of Mike Woodson, the current coach to IU men's basketball team. Pancho's also was visited by Mary Wilson of the Supremes. He was very happy about that. And when she came to perform at the IU Auditorium in 1985. Danny shares many of his stories over the 2 decades of Pancho's Villa in Bloomington through his cookbook, which unfortunately is no longer in print. But you can see a copy of it in the exhibit. Danny, and there's a copy on the Facebook page. Yes. The pages, are all the pages scanned?
Every page of the cookbook is scanned on the Remembering Pancho page.
Okay. Every page of the cookbook is scanned and available on the Remembering Pancho's Facebook page. So you can check it out there. Okay. Danny said that even though Pancho's is gone, the memory of good food, good people, and good times will continue because Pancho's relationship with his customers was very special. Here's some more pictures provided by Danny's daughter. And this is a wait staff celebrating their win of the Server Olympics. I'm pretty sure it's Server Olympics, held at the Taste of Bloomington, although we're not sure what year. But you can get this t-shirt We're selling the t-shirt today, so you can get your own copy of Pancho's via t-shirt. Okay, the Tao. An icon of the 1970s, the Tao Restaurant was the first gourmet vegetarian establishment in Bloomington and very much the product of the counterculture movement in America at the time. The Tao was started by Michael Shoemaker, now, forgive me, Swami Chidananda, and Spiridon Strategos and Jeffrey Morris to help fund their newly established ashram, or a religious retreat. Members of the ashram would work in the kitchen and the wait staff, and then the restaurant funds would support the ashram. In addition to the Tao, Rudy's Bakery in Delhi was also operated by the ashram group and helped to fund it. The bakery's namesake was the head baker, Swami Rudananda, who was a Kundalini yoga teacher at the ashram, from an ashram in New York. An article in the Indianapolis News in 1981 states that about 6,000 people a week buy at the bakery. That's crazy. Even though the food's popularity, the ideals that started the restaurant led to its demise. Pressure from the town, as well as internal differences, caused the restaurant to close and the ashram to leave Bloomington for Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1981. You can get a copy of the cookbook. We brought copies for sale, so you could buy a copy of the cookbook with the recipes that they, especially from the bakery, since it was so popular. And global cuisine. I couldn't not mention 4th Street. With more than 75 restaurants representing 18 countries, you'll never tire of discovering new food in Monroe County. For decades, 4th Street in downtown Bloomington has been the epicenter of global cuisine in town. I unfortunately have not been able to uncover how 4th Street developed and when did it become this place to go to get ethnic cuisine and global cuisine. So I'm not really sure, but we do know that's what it is today. International food restaurants really rose in popularity in Bloomington in the 1970s with the increase of international students attending Indiana University. And then some of them stayed after graduation and opened their own restaurants. One of the earliest multicultural eateries was Pancho's Villa, opened in 1967. And in the 1980s, Sophia Kim, which you can see, Sophia Kim purchased the Indiana Sweet Shop next to the Buzzkirk Chumley Theater. She continued to sell the store's usual sweets and for the theater, but then also added her native Korean cuisine to the menu as well. So it became a perfect blend of cultures. Other Asian food restaurants have included like the House of Hunan, which you can see the chef here. Japonais, Dragon Inn, The Taste of India, Siam House, those are just a few, along with other global restaurants like Ashenda, Flora Ristorante, Grazie, Chez Nous, just to name a few. I mean, there's so many. So I really wasn't able to find out why 4th Street specifically became a global food destination, but that's something that I'm interested in learning about and finding out more, doing more research to figure that out. Okay, so now I'm going to highlight some of the other restaurants that are included in the exhibit, but I unfortunately didn't have time or space to do full research on them. We only have this exhibit in one gallery, so it wasn't able to give everybody a biographical review like I have the past restaurants. But I wanted to include them nonetheless because you don't always need information about owners, locations, or the history of the restaurant to remember what your favorite meal was there and to enjoy the restaurants of the community's past. So I hope you forgive me for not providing more information, but I hope you enjoy these highlights. The Taylor's Coffee Cup. Yay! Shout out. So Paulette's father, Paul Taylor, who owned Taylor Coffee Cup. They generously provided these pictures to share, including one of Mr. and Mrs. Taylor posing in their costumes for old-fashioned days here. The Fireside Inn. So we have a menu from the Fireside Inn. This is just the wine list, not the food list, but really that's nice. So that's okay too. and photograph from the late 1950s of the Fireside Inn. The Jordan Grill was on 3rd Street. It's currently the building where the TIS store is today. And even though the TIS store has like siding on it and everything, you can kind of still see, like there's a whole nother building right here, of course, but like you can still kind of see the shape of it. But this photograph is in our collection, but Phil Zook loaned us the menu from his collection, so it's great to have them both together. The menu has some really interesting sandwiches on it. There's one, a pork and peanut butter sandwich for 15 cents. And then a lettuce sandwich. I don't know what that is. It's just a lettuce sandwich for 10 cents. So I guess you're paying 10 cents for lettuce and bread. Not really sure. We have a couple pictures of Ryan's Café and the Hideaway. Self's Country Kitchen and Curly's Cafe. East Fork Restaurant, so Mike and Sherry Mobley. Thank you, Mobleys. Shared with me their family's restaurant, East Fork Family Restaurant on 3rd Street, where the KFC is today. And this is a lovely interior shot as well. It's always nice to have the exterior and the interior so you really know what it looks like on the inside. The Stardust Cafe, and I can't forget to mention the Stardust. Located at 205 North Walnut, the cafe was named after the famous Stardust song by Hoagie Carmichael. So the song came first, and then it was the cafe, not the other way around. Some people get that confused. But of course not you all. Here are a couple of pictures of Hoagie that we have in our collection. They're listed as being in the Stardust. I think like this one you can very clearly see. It's a restaurant, all the stars on the wall. It's really fun. This one I'm not so sure it's in the Stardust, but that's what it says on the photo, that it's in the Stardust. But he's drinking with some friends. So here he is with him and his wife, and then here he is drinking with some friends. And we do have the Stardust Cafe menu in the collection. Okay. So these are just some of the many restaurants that are mentioned. There's more mentioned in the exhibit, so you'll have to definitely come and see it before next weekend when it closes. There are just some of the restaurants. The last day is November 5th. However, I fully recognize that all the restaurants that we've had in the county, or even the ones that we currently have, are mentioned in this program or in this exhibit. There couldn't possibly be enough space in the gallery or enough time in the day for visitors to read all of that information. So this exhibit has been so popular, and we've had so many people tell us about other restaurants that they know of, that we have penciled in a part 2. So a restaurants part 2, set for 2025. So we do plan quite a few years out. It does take quite a while to plan restaurants or exhibits in general. So we are going to plan for a restaurants part 2 in 2025. So you have plenty of time to tell me your stories and share your things with me. We also need your help on what exhibits should we include next time. If you have any objects relating to the restaurants in our communities, please let me know. There's my contact. But what was your favorite restaurant? Now I'd like to open it up to the floor and see what restaurants you all remember. What was your favorite and why? Tamale Joe, the food cart. Yeah, the food cart. Yeah. Tamale Joe, he was a food cart. He had a cart. So yes, so Liza did tell me about Tamale Joe, the food cart. And so technically, I did not count Tamale Joe as a restaurant because you didn't sit and eat, and he was, as a traditional restaurant. So he was the first multicultural food you could get with tamales. Street food, yes. But so he was the first food truck, if you'd say. But yes, I didn't count him as a restaurant, so I still say that Pancho's was the first The old oaken bucket, yes. Anybody else? Yeah. Yes, that is the same Rismalos's. Yes, it's just a foot generations down. Yes. Oh, she said, was Frank Rismalos, the doctor, the same Rismalos as the Nicks? And I said, yes, just a few generations down. Yes. Hinkle's Hamburgers. Yes, I have heard that one. They have been in operation since 1930, and so they will be featured in part 2. You'll have to come check it out. Yeah. Any other? Yes.
There's been a lot of people that heard
Stotts Café. S-T-O-T-T-S. Stotts Cafe. Drive-ins.
Yeah, what about the drive-ins, like Dog and Sud?
Oh, yeah. Fritch's. Yeah. There's a really fun one, Fritch's Big Boy on the square. They had a really cool sign out front. North, on the north side. Yeah, they had one on the north. Oh, yeah, right. Yes, I have seen an ad. It was like a yearbook ad where there was like some teens in a convertible going like, yeah, at a Fritch's, yeah. Any other restaurants that should be included? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Waffle House. There is a Waffle House photo included in the current exhibit. It's the opening day of Waffle House, and it's a great photo. I love it. Yes. Fergie's. Whoa, that was really loud. Okay, Fergie's. Sully's. I have heard mention of Sully's, yes. Oak and Bucket, yes. Yeah. Bud's Sandwich Shop.
Down by RCA.
By RCA, okay. The Big Wheel. Yes, we do have, there is an advertisement from a yearbook about Big Wheel in the exhibit today. Yes.
I'm trying to remember one, and I can't remember the name of it. It was on the corner of College and the old police station. And it said catty corner to the corner, and it was carry out. You went in, you ordered your sandwiches or whatever, and you carried them out. And it was around the time, about 2 years ago. Nobody can remember. And I
Well, we could
really was
probably-
there, guys. Help me out.
You really were there. We could look in a phone directory. Yeah. We could probably figure that out in a directory, a phone directory. Yeah. Yeah. Because we can look at the street address. I'm sorry? Ivanhoe's. Portico's. Portico's.
We had a repeat question for the restaurant we're trying to identify.
Do you want to try and say that again for the restaurant we're trying to name?
I'll just hand it over.
On the corner of Walnut and 4th, catty cornered across from the old police station. And it was a carry out only. You went in, you ordered your sandwiches. They made a great roast beef. And the building said that the door was catty cornered or asymmetrical to the corner of the street. Anybody? See, I know it was there. I threw up in the parking lot. Not from the food. I had just turned 21.
The Parkway and the Dairy Barn. Okay. Gibbon Denzel's. I have heard. Yes, we heard of Gibbon Denzel's over here. Yeah. Rainey's Cafe. Where was that at? Okay, on South Walnut. Okay, yeah.
There was a Chinese place downtown that was really good called Lung Chung.
Yes, Lung Chung. We do have a photo of Lung Chung. Yes.
Maybe the same building, but Bender's Cafe.
Yes.
Cafeteria.
Yes. Bender's was the same place as Ladyman's.
No, Lung Chung.
Lung Chung. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Yes.
The Stardust, is that now the Bluebird?
I'd have to check an address on that. I do not know the address of the Bluebird. Mhm. We have a menu of Jeremiah Sweeney's, and yes, and so it's in the exhibit now, but we don't have a bio of Jeremiah Sweeney's. Yeah. Came a drive-in restaurant on the south side. I don't know. Here, you can ask. You can ask the group. I don't know.
That's all I mean, I remember the bus stop. Yeah, by the railroad track. Yeah. Big mug, yeah. What do you think for?
Oh, Wee Willie's. I've heard of Wee Willie's. I'm sorry. Yes. Doves. Duff? Oh, Duffs. Okay, I haven't heard of Duffs before. Okay, well, if there are any other restaurants you want me to know about, you feel free to reach out. My email is on our website. But thank you all very much. Thank you for having me today.